There we go. Okay, we're going to talk basically about the benefits of trees, selection and care. So it's kind of like the who, which is you, by the way, the what trees, the where here in Central Texas, how we plan to take care of trees, and the what. Or maybe I said
Why?
The why. There you go. Benefits, of course. Okay, why do we plant trees? Okay, well, because and we're also going to talk about when's the best time to plant trees as well. We're going to talk about recommended native trees for the Central Texas Hill Country. Tree selection resources. There's sources out there that can help you select trees if you want to add to your landscape. We'll talk a little bit about the care of native trees. And we'll also talk about some local arboretums that you can visit in the area. Why plant native trees? Well, you guys are all like the choir in terms of native trees. So we're going to talk quickly about native trees, but for the most part, we're going to get into the benefits of all trees, okay? So, of course, they save water, right? And native trees save water better than non-native trees because they're drought tolerant. They improve our water quality by sort of filtering out pollutants, you know, surface water and the aquifers and things like that. They provide wildlife habitat, of course. They improve air quality, and they reduce maintenance. When you use native plants, you're not going to be working as hard. You know, they kind of take care of themselves once they're established. So other trees also really do this to a certain extent, but native trees, think about this. A native tree planted in its normal environment, okay, that basically is interacting with native birds, native insects, native mammals, you know, in a native tree in that eco area where it belongs. Everything just is symbolic in, they just kind of work together, right? And they depend upon each other. Not that non-native plants don't do that, but non-native plants may not be a source of nectar in flowers for certain insects. We all know insects is basically kind of the root of the whole chain, the food chain, right? So it's not that other non-native trees can't do this, it's just that native trees do it better. Okay, this isn't moving forward now, so can you move the next slide forward, please? Okay, so why plant a tree? Because of these benefits they provide. Next. Trees help clean up our air and mitigate climate change. Okay, so global forests provide basically, they basically can handle about a third of the fossil fuels that escape into the air by just taking that and cleaning it up. Also, in terms of trees producing oxygen, the forests down in South America, the rainforests, they actually produce 20% of the oxygen that's in this world, okay? Trees also, you know, again, provide the oxygen and that we need. They take in the CO2, they sequester the carbon in their wood, and they give off oxygen that, you know, we breathe and animals need. Trees help clean up our drinking water, as I said before. You know, they filter out the pollutants of water on the surface and in aquifers. They help control stormwater runoff and soil erosion to kind of keep things from just flooding things out. You know, it's when, like here in the hill country, when people go into developed land, and we have a lot of juniper, and they say, oh, we got to get rid of this juniper, you know, when they go and cut it all out. Well, what are you going to replace it with? Particularly if it's on a hillside, right? You start taking all those junipers, then you're going to be seeing your soil coming at you over time. So you either cut it out and leave it there and kind of create dams as erosion is happening when we get a flood event. Let's face it, our weather is really two things. It's floods interrupted by about 3 or 4 rain events, and it's drought after that, you know, kind of. All right, so what else? Trees provide food for us, right? They basically provide like the fruits, the nuts, you know, and sometimes the foliage that we can eat. They provide the materials for building our shelter. Birds also kind of use their nesting materials as well. Their bark and their leaves and their flowers provide, you know, perfumes, medicines. The wood itself provides fuel for us, right? And of course, we know that they certainly make our wine and our whiskey and our barbecue taste better. Other benefits, trees provide much needed cooling and UV protection. In terms of their shade, they probably can reduce the temperature as much as 20 degrees. And when you consider the leaves that provide the transpiration and water vapor in the area, you're probably getting a benefit out of that. So you might, in the shade, get a 30% cut in the temperature. In terms of UV, there's a UVB that is sort of a cancer-causing type thing. If you get too much of it, well, trees provide protection and kind of reduce and mitigate possible cancer. Trees contribute to our health. Well, pretty much because of some of the things that we just talked about. Mentally and physically, trees are beneficial to us as well as wildlife. They help us save energy. A properly placed tree in a landscape near a building can cut down the cooling load by as much as 30%. And on the heating side, as much as 50%, right? If you have a deciduous tree that loses its leaves, so you get more sunlight in the winter time, right? Trees benefit wildlife. Well, you know, gosh, trees are kind of like the core of the chain for taking care of habitat. I mean, they provide shelter, right? They provide a place, you know, for food, just all the things we mentioned earlier. Trees help reduce urban crime, stress, anxiety, and noise. Studies have shown that a treed landscape in an urban area tends to have less crime as opposed to an urban area where there is no trees and it's just all concrete and buildings, right? They also can be used to screen out maybe undesirable views, right? They also can screen out noise. They can basically also provide a good barrier for wind. Okay, if you want to block wind, you put some evergreen trees around there. Can you put us forward there again? More benefits. We're coming to the end. Trees increase our property values. Okay, a residential home with a mature tree, typically, according to the studies and real estate agents, you can add anywhere from 7 to 19% value to that property. And they do the same thing for neighborhoods that are treed with mature trees and communities, much more desirable, much more valuable. Trees provide investments for our communities and also for our environment. Think about it, when you plant a tree, okay, not only are you improving the habitat, the environment, our communities, but trees live for hundreds of years. So what you're basically doing is providing a gift to the environment and to future generations, many generations. Trees are beautiful. You know, it's a great place to just rest. You know, you walk into a treed area or forest, something like that, and you just kind of, your shoulders just drop a little bit, right? You know, you just feel comfortable. And for me, you know, I like to sleep on the trees. You know, they provide a good place to rest. So these are just benefits that all trees provide. Okay, so what's the best time to plant a tree? And first off, you guys who have been in our NLCP level 3 class, you can't answer this question. You already know the answer. Okay. So what's the best time to plant a tree? Is it fall or the spring? Okay, I'm a show of hands here. How many think it's the fall? Okay, and how many think it's the spring? Well, you're all wrong. The correct answer is the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Seriously, okay, seriously though. You can plant trees both in the fall and in the spring. But when you plant a tree in the fall, you have a better shot of it going through that transition quicker if you plant a deciduous tree in the fall. And here's why, because what we're trying to do when we plant trees in the fall or spring, we're trying to set that new tree up for handling a Texas summer. And it's got to have its roots established first to make it through the summer without, you know, stressing out all the way through. So when you plant a tree in the fall and it's a deciduous tree, it's not using its energy that you want it stored in its root systems developed in the summer to try to keep that foliage going, right? So it's better to maybe plant that evergreen tree, okay, that has all the leaves. It's better to plant that one in the spring, but deciduous trees in the fall. But here's the other catch. You got to be committed to taking care of that tree over the winter, right? So if you've got to be honest with yourself, you're gonna have to water it every week and sometimes twice a week. So if you're not prepared to commit to taking care of a tree planted in the fall, then you ought to just wait for the springtime. And then it's easier to go out in the spring and take care of a tree than over the winter time. So that's it. Advance, thank you. Okay, tree selections. Okay, we're gonna go over some trees that are recommended trees that are basically easy to find or relatively easy to find in local nurseries here. And they're going to be native trees. And the first few trees we're going to talk about are what we call understory trees. These are trees that are typically 10 to maybe 20 feet tall. And they can usually exist under larger canopy trees, which we'll go over a few of those as well. First tree we're going to talk about is the Texas mountain laurel. This is a evergreen tree, and it's noted mostly for its spring flowers, which smell like grape soda or grape bubble gum, right? And this is sort of a, if you can see that here, this is the flowers there. It also ends up after the flowers putting out a seed pod. That inside the seed pod there's a little red seed that it's poisonous. You know, and but it also produces little small trees that pop up out of it afterwards. And sometimes they have worms, and a lot of people get excited about the worms when the new buds come out, but it never kills the tree. And it only lasts for a few weeks, and the foliage recovers real fast. But if you don't like them, you can just hose them off, basically, and that'll take care of the worms. What else about this tree here? Oh yeah. Once you plant a Texas mountain laurel, you cannot basically transport it or dig it up and go somewhere else. It will not make it. So once it's planted, it needs to be there. So, which brings up a good point. When you select a tree to plant, what you really need to think about is, what do I want out of this tree? I mean, what is this tree's function going to be? Is it something for beauty? Is it something for shading out an area? Is it for providing habitat? Basically think about why you want to plant a particular tree, and then you kind of select the tree that is going to provide that function that you're thinking about. It's much easier to sort of plan on a piece of paper your tree, and then if you change your mind, okay, you just turn that pencil over and just erase it or hit the button, rather than taking a shovel and digging it up and trying to transplant it. Your chances of it surviving a transplant, particularly this one, you know, are not so good. So think about why you want to plant the tree, what function you want it to provide, and then find a tree that'll basically meet that function. And it doesn't have to be one function, it could be several things, right? You know, for me, I like trees that I can put a hammock between, you know, and just kind of rest, you know, big, strong oak trees. Anyway, next slide, please.
Come on. There we go.
Oh, and by the way, my wife, Becky, if you're watching here, I gotta move my hands. You know, you tell me don't move my hands around. That's just the way I do it. She told me, don't move your hands around so much.
Oh, no, tell her we.
They like it, okay? All right.
Yes, and it keeps us away.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So the next looking at here is a Texas redbud. This is a tree that it grows about maybe between 10 to 15 feet tall at maturity. It's most noted for its introduction of spring. When the Texas redbud buds out its purple or kind of reddish flowers. I don't know why they call it a redbud, because it's never red. It's kind of a purple violet. But anyway, it kind of announces spring, you know. And it comes in many types of species and subspecies. In addition to the Texas redbud, sometimes an eastern redbud, and particularly cultivars that are made from the eastern redbud can be used in a landscape. There's also an Oklahoma redbud, but it's really just a version of the Texas redbud. You know, Oklahoma doesn't have the original. Well, I'm not saying that. Actually, the truth is there's a lot of trees out there that are called Texas something, you know, but in other states they're called like the Ohio Buckeye or something like that. Texas does the same thing. It's the same tree, but we put our name on it. It's a Texas redbud. What's the same tree?
There's a Mexican redbud too.
There's a Mexican redbud as well. Oklahoma redbud, Mexican redbud,
Probably also
Eastern redbud.
So these-
Yeah. There's a great hybrid out there or cultivar called a Rising Sun redbud. And after it flowers like this, when it puts on its leaves, they're chartreuse colors, they're lime colors, they're tangerine colors. And those colors last for about the middle of the summer, and then it kind of turns to green again. Quick story about that is this plant was developed by the Greenleaf nursery, which is they have a nursery in Oklahoma and a nursery in South Texas. And the garden writer for the San Antonio Express News heard about this tree about 5 years ago. And on the front page of the garden section, there's all kind of pictures of this thing, and she's just kind of writing up about how gorgeous this tree is. And of course, everybody's wanting to get this tree, you know, so they're calling up their nurseries, saying, hey, I want to get this Rising Sun redbud tree. And I even went out and dug 2 holes in the front of my house, you know, and put irrigation in it. I'm going to get that tree. Well, I call up Rainbow Gardens, and they tell me, and also the producer of this Rising Sun, which was Greenleaf Nursery, said, well, there's only one in San Antonio. We didn't want her to put that story out until next year. You know.
Oh.
Anyway, long story short, I ended up putting an order in with Rainbow Gardens. There were a bunch of trees and all of them. I had 2 on that list, you know, and they were going to get them for me. And so a few weeks later, I get a call from Rainbow Gardens, Ronnie over there, and he says, hey, we got your order in, but those 2 Rising Sun redbuds, they didn't put it on the truck, but don't worry, that's all right. They got a guy who put 2 of those in his pickup truck, and he's driving down now from Oklahoma. And he's going to send it to me. That was great service, huh? So they're doing great right now in my front yard. But anyway, a Rising Sun version, it's generally available at most nurseries now, but it wasn't a few years ago.
You think it's as hardy as the Texas
Yes.
redbud?
I think it is. My experience has been, it has been, but you know, not quite drought tolerant because it's made from the eastern redbud. So it needs a little more water, but it can make it as long as you
Do
take
the
care of it.
eastern and the Texas Oklahoma have slightly different colored blossoms?
No, the colors are basically the same. The difference is the shape of the leaf, okay? The Mexican is smaller and very wavy,
Yes,
right?
it's very
And the Texas is kind of heart-shaped and a little bit larger. And the Oklahoma is kind of somewhere in between. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here is the Texas persimmon. This is a deciduous tree. It grows very slowly, and it's usually about 10 to 15 feet tall. It's pretty endemic in the Texas Hill Country, and probably every one of you have one of these in your yard, you know, and if you don't, just look closely, right? And they pop up everywhere, right? In fact, when Becky and I moved here, you know, on our landscaping plan, we said, oh yeah, we need to get some of those trees, you know, so we bought about 4 of them, you know, planted them. Then we realized, oh my God, they're everywhere. We didn't know, we came from Houston, we didn't know anything about these things, you know. So anyway, it kind of has a bark that's very attractive, sort of like a crepe myrtle, very smooth. This tree comes in two versions, male and female. And the female is the one that produces the fruit, which is edible, but it has a big seed in it. And I caution you, when you do decide where you want to put this plant, use a male plant if you're going to put it near a driveway or a walkway, right? Because it doesn't produce the berries and all. Or the female one, keep it away from things you don't want staying, or dropping. Like today, Becky told me, hey, that Texas persimmon is dropping little fruits now into our pond. So we need to put a net over the pond to catch these things for a few weeks. You also see these seeds too in the scat of raccoons. Raccoons love it, and so you see the seeds there. A great plant though, but it's the only negative thing about it, and it's not so much a negative, is that it's extremely slow growing, and left to its own devices, it's a multi-trunk tree, not a singular trunk tree, unless you prune it that way. Next slide, please. Okay, this is again another understory tree in this group that we're talking about now. This is the flame leaf sumac, the prairie flame leaf sumac, and over here is its color in the fall, summer white flowers, and then right after the fall colors there that are usually just a bright red flame, looks like a flame, right? Then it puts out these small red fruits that, the birds just go crazy over it, Great plant. It grows about as high as maybe 20 feet, 15 to 20 feet. Relatively fast grower. Again, obviously it's deciduous. The thing you have to caution about placing this plant is its root structure. This root, if I planted a tree where I'm standing right now, the roots within a year and a half will hit that wall about 50 feet away. They just spread out. So you don't want to plant this tree like I did when we first came in and put it right next to our house foundation and right next to our septic system and right next to our water supply. So we had to take them out. So that's the knock against it. Just don't put it where the roots can do damage. But it's
Plus
a great.
the suckers all over the place too.
Yeah, the suckers it's the roots because they're everywhere setting up suckers. Good point. Thank you.
The deer will eat the suckers though.
The deer will eat the suckers, right? Next plant or tree is the rusty blackhaw viburnum. This is a really great tree, kind of a medium to kind of slowish speed of growth. It's a deciduous tree. It has great white flowers in the springtime, very glossy leaves, okay, which are kind of a really glossy green throughout the spring and the summer after it flowers and all. And then in the fall, you get this really nice kind of bronze leaf color that's really shiny and kind of stands out. And then after that, you get these little berries that birds will go crazy over as well.
They look like little clusters of grapes.
Yeah, clusters of grapes, yes, and they just love it. And of course, the flowers are great for the bees. They're buzzing all over it, and the nectar for the butterflies. Great tree, and it doesn't require much water. It's kind of drought tolerant. I wouldn't say very drought tolerant, but you don't really need to, once it's established, it's on its own. Next tree we have is the possum holly. This is a holly version that is a lot like the yopon here at the bottom here. And basically the difference between the possum haw holly and the yopon holly is the possum haw loses its leaves. It's deciduous, so it loses its leaves, and the yopon will kind of keep its leaves. So the red berries, which is the striking feature of this plant, aren't seen as much. But in the wintertime, the only red color you're going to see in the landscape here and on the Edwards Aquifer is this right here, right? And usually you see it along fence lines because birds have kind of planted that. Birds go crazy over this. At my house, we have several of these, and each one of the mockingbirds claim one as their own, and they defend it like the like the hummingbirds do, right? You know, and they do that, and it's like theirs until the cedar waxweeds kind of make their migration through, and then in a day or two they just gorge over it, and it's gone. But slow growing tree, but very drought tolerant. Grows to maybe as tall as maybe 10, 15 feet tall. And it's multi-trunk, but again, you could prune it to be a single trunk, but I think it looks better personally as a multi-trunk tree. Okay, the next tree, again, is an understory tree. This is a desert willow tree. And as you can see from the photo on the left, it kind of has an airy foliage type of look to it. So it doesn't really block out things. It's deciduous. It has either kind of pinkish, white, or purplish flowers that bloom, God, from spring all the way through late summer, maybe as far as the fall. These flowers, they drop all over the place, you know, like if you're in a walkway or a driveway, you know, but it's not too bad. If you have children like my kids used to do, I just send them out there with a broom and just clean it up, you know, and they love that. Not really. Anyway, what else about
He
this?
lies. He lies.
Yeah, I hear you, Don. Yeah, right.
She
Yeah.
said
His daughter just said he lied.
Okay. Anyway, what else about this tree? Again, it's deciduous.
Probably made Becky do it.
Yeah, it's no, the kids did. The kids did. You know, otherwise we didn't feed them.
That's a good example of that tree over here. No, in the library. That's a good example.
Yeah, yeah. What else? You can, you know, because it's airy foliage, you can plant other things underneath it. You know, other shrubs and ground covers and perennials under it. When you go to prune this tree, I think I've mentioned this before, but this tree tends to kind of open up and kind of drop its trunk. So unlike what you normally do with a tree in terms of trying to prune away from the inside, you want to try to prune so you always have some branches going to the inside to kind of counteract its natural drooping area growth. Great tree though, it's real hardy.
The branches can get pretty brittle.
Yes,
They tend to break off.
yes, they tend to get very brittle and break off in storms, and when we get ice type storms, you know, they really kind of hang on to it and kind of
So you
break.
trim from trim outside?
You want to trim so that you have branches going toward the inside, towards the center. Yeah. This tree can also be crossed with a catalpa tree to produce a catalpa tree. And the catalpa tree has a large white flower that's also a sort of a trumpet shaped, which of course we know trumpet shaped flowers are great for hummingbirds. They just love that. But anyway, it produces a larger tree, kind of like the same shape there, but just a larger flower and tend to be a little more white and sort of a slight peak
Does
to
the
it.
leaves get smaller when you cross it?
Yes, actually they are a little bit, yeah. But actually, I don't know why, because the catalpa tree has a very large leaf,
Yeah.
but when they cross it, it tends to be smaller leaves, but it's still kind of willow shaped. Heath necklace, this is another understory tree. It's actually a cousin to the first tree we looked at, the Texas mountain laurel. Yes, ma'am.
If you don't mind a quick interruption.
Yes,
Somebody asked
interruption.
about the desert willow. Can it take northwest exposure?
Yes. Yes, you can take northwest exposure, southwest, east-west, all the way around the compass. Take it all.
They used to
But
out in the
it likes
middle of the
sun, but it can handle partial sun as well.
And out in the middle of the yard.
Yeah. You know, like most trees and flowering trees and things like that, you know, the more sun it's in, the more flowering you typically get, just as a rule of thumb. So the Eve's necklace is a tree that grows about maybe 12 to 20 feet tall.
And you said it was a cousin to them?
It's a cousin to the Texas mountain laurel. Yeah. And the striking feature about this, of course, is the seed pods that start off as kind of a purplish flower, and then they turn to these black seed pods, and they kind of are connected, and they kind of leave a look of a necklace, hence the name, the bees necklace. Fairly slow growing, for at least my experience. We've got about half a dozen of these. First 5 years, they just kind of maybe gain about 6 inches to maybe 8 inches a year. And then after 5 or 7 years, they shoot up. But it's also, again, a tree that you look at the foliage on the left there, and that's about as thick as it gets. So again, you could grow anything underneath it. Very drought tolerant as well. Okay, now we're going to talk about some canopy trees. And these are maple trees. On the left is the big tooth maple tree, and I'll talk about that for a bit. It's a tree that is deciduous. Obviously, you're looking at the fall color of this tree. This is the Acer granda dentatum. There is another version of the big tooth maple tree that's called the Uvalde big tooth maple. And the reason why these things were once 10,000 years ago, after the Ice Age, they completely covered this area here. But over time and with climate change, actually there's only small pockets of where these trees now grow on their own, like in Lost Maples, right? Lost Maples, and that's why it's called Lost Maples, because there's only little pockets in Texas and also in New Mexico and parts of Mexico, northern Mexico, where groups of them grow, and the next grove of these things that naturally occur are hundreds of miles away, hence Lost Maples. And I don't know when they're going to stop growing over here on their own, but they can still be had in certain places. Bernie, a lot of nurseries in Bernie provide these, because the city of Bernie basically are giving these trees, or were giving these trees away. They had a program where they tried to give them to businesses, so they would line Main Street and all with these trees. Yes,
Are
questions?
these maple trees, I live on a rock side, on Rock Hill,
Yeah,
continually, and will those survive?
that's where mine are, because of good drainage. They're on the hillside. Yes. Now the question for Sarah first.
It was more, the Bernie chapter of the Native Plant Society has a giveaway program. They're trying to really establish more of them in their area, because they are part of the lost area, and they give them protection and watering things and everything they need to, for people who apply for them and qualify.
So
They
what
give
Sarah,
away about $10,000 worth of trees every year.
so what Sarah was saying, in Bernie, there's a program where they actually give $10,000 worth of these trees away to encourage these things to be established and to keep them going. So that's interesting. I used to get my trees from Medina, the Love
Yeah.
Creek.
They may very well source them there, but
Well, they-
it's the
you know,
chapter that-
That place had the Apple store, in Medina, and then they had a nursery. They've shut down the nursery part of the business. New management and all that stuff, and so there's probably very few of their trees that are left. Sometimes they'll have some, the nursery, yeah, other than what they're doing now, they have a few pots in front of the Apple store, but about a quarter of a mile before you got to the Apple store is where the nursery was, and they're no longer selling.
Guys,
I'm sorry, what?
the two guys.
No, that's Medina Nursery. This is the Apple store,
Oh,
Love Creek Apple Store.
So the other Medina
The
nurseries.
Medina Nursery is still going crazy. And,
Oh.
Ishmael and those guys, they're still good.
I've never seen the Apple store. They have apple orchards
Oh,
there
the
years
Love
ago.
Creek Apple Store, you gotta get their ice cream and their pies. Oh my God, they're to die for. But that's another subject.
We really didn't on those guys.
Anyway, so this tree is actually a sort of in the same family of the southern sugar maple. It's a sugar maple type tree, and that's another plant that also does well. A sugar maple tree. If you can't get a big tooth maple, the sugar maple, my experience has been that the fall color actually lasts longer than the big tooth maple. And also in terms of color, everybody wants the red fall color, but you really don't know what you're going to get until you plant it and gets a little mature, because your environment and the soil and its own genetics basically determine whether it's going to be red, orange, or yellow in terms of the fall color. Question? Here?
My comment was gonna be that when I bought my big tooth maple, the nurseryman said, you know, you need to be careful to plant them such that as the tree is growing, it has afternoon shade, or else it's gonna need a lot more water.
That is true of all maples.
Yeah.
Maples, you tend to want to plant them where they almost have a nurse tree above them, a canopy tree that protects it from Texas sun, you know, when it's young. And also, particularly for the next tree we're going to talk about, the red maple, they don't tend to like being in full sun initially, and they don't like a windy spot. I've learned that the hard way, you know. So protecting it from the sun and also strong winds for the red maple, okay, is what you should consider when you're trying to place it. Again, these trees, both these trees grow to about 50 to 60 feet tall at full maturity. The other tree that you could plant also is the red maple, not as drought tolerant as the big tooth maple or the southern sugar maple, but the one on the left is the red maple. And what's great about this tree is almost 9 months a year you get color out of it. Okay, so in the middle of the fall, you're getting that red color all the way through, and then as the last leaves fall off, you get these red buds that come out, you know, and flowers, you know, in the wintertime. And so maybe if you got one of these and the previous tree we talked about, the understory tree, the holly, the possum holly, you got two red colors there. And then after the first, these flowers that you're seeing here in the middle of the winter, after they're gone, then you get the new leaves coming out, and they're red also through springtime. And so you really got color with a red maple all the way through that you're not getting with the other two types of maples, the big tooth and the southern sugar maple. But they're a little more difficult to get established than the other two are. But it's a tree worth trying to get established.
Would you get those from like, I work at Walmart Garden Center.
Okay,
Would that be a viable plant to buy from the garden center, or should I go someplace else?
here's my take. First off, to answer your question real quickly, somewhere else.
Okay.
The problem with big box stores is they're sourcing their trees from all over the United States. So where that tree was propagated, even though it's the same species of red maple, you want to try to buy trees that are locally propagated because they've adapted through their genes and over time to handle our, you know, crazy weather and our sun and our floods and our drought. So you're not really sure where that thing is sourced from, but typically the big box stores are buying volume from Florida, okay, or from Midwest or something like that.
Most of their trees state that they are from True, Texas.
Well, that's good.
East Texas.
Yeah, then I would go ahead and
Yeah,
do that.
they're trying.
Yeah. You know, the other good thing about buying trees, let's say at Home Depot and plants at Home Depot, you know, they give you, they don't ask questions if it dies and you bring it back, you know, and they'll give you another one now. But, you know, if it doesn't survive, you know, what's the point of changing it out all the time? You know? Go to the nice nurseries that are local here, and you're going to get the best deal, the best quality plants that work best here. Okay, the next tree we have is probably about the maybe third most popular tree that you see in our Como County or the Edwards Aquifer is a cedar elm tree. It's a deciduous tree. It grows to be about 50, 60 feet tall at maturity. It is a type of elm tree, and you can always tell an elm tree because if you look at the base of the leaf of any elm tree, it's asymmetrical, right? It's not even. So you can tell that is a type of elm tree. The color of this, even though this photo on the left shows fall color, it's got a little red to it, typically It's a bright yellow tree and very drought tolerant once established. This is a photo of the tree that has a story. This is in my front yard. This is the tree that when we were building our house, the first change order I had out in the field was the superintendent says, hey, your driveway is going right in the middle where this little 2-inch diameter tree is. Do you want me to pull that tree out? I said, no, leave the tree and move the driveway. And so now this tree, 14 years later, oops, go back. This tree 14 years later has a diameter of about maybe 14 inches. It has the most beautiful kind of oblong shape, classic. You know, so it basically said, thank you, and I'll repay you for that. So it's a great tree. Once established, it's pretty hardy. This one here, you can't really see it too well, but these are little sapsucker
Yeah.
holes all through here. And, you know, they went after the insects that were in there, but the tree just kept going, you know. And the only thing we do with this tree is we kind of prune a little bit of the lower leaves, because my darling wife, who loves to cut the grass, just said, hey, it hits me sometimes. Can you keep it going? Anything. You know, I get her the best lawnmower she ever wants. Self-propelled Honda. You do well, honey. Okay, thank you. Cypress trees. There's two types that grow here, native here. The first one on the left is the bald cypress. It's deciduous, grows anywhere from 60 to 100 feet tall. Fairly slow growing tree, but super sturdy. It's actually a conifer, and most conifers are not deciduous trees. They're evergreen, but this one does lose its leaves in the fall, but it has a really striking rust color to it. Right now, it's reacting in our drought, and they're dropping their leaves, but it's not going to die, you know. And the interesting thing about the bald cypress tree is it can survive being totally inundated in water. It can survive just the opposite, being in a dry area. So it can handle both extremes. Now, when it is submerged in water all the time, they produce what's called a cypress knee. And that's the way for the tree to try to get a little more oxygen to its roots. This tree will live thousands of years if it doesn't get hit by disease or something like that. And when it dies, the wood doesn't degrade. It's like almost like cedars, but it even lasts longer than cedars. In Louisiana, when these things, they go hunting for these in the bayous and they try to bring them up. And the wood is just in perfect condition, could have been dead for hundreds of years. And so it's a great tree in terms of living long. The other tree that is also related to it is the Montezuma cypress. And it does a little better in our drier areas than the bald cypress. It doesn't require as much water. It's semi-evergreen, depending upon the type of winter we have. It may keep its leaves all the time, or if it is going to lose its leaves, it's going to lose its leaves late in fall. But and it grows wider and faster, not a whole lot faster, but does grow faster than the bald cypress does.
And where's that native to?
What is that?
Where is that native to?
It is native to southern Texas and all the way down to central Mexico. Okay, and out to Arizona as well.
Yeah, question.
Yeah.
Question.
My bald cypress is about that color right now.
Okay.
So is there anything I can do to make it feel better?
Yes, we'll talk about that in a few slides.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, the final tree that we're going to talk about is the Texas red oak. And this is a tree that obviously is deciduous, and what you're looking at are a couple of trees we planted after we figured out that, hey, we got some of these already on the property. But anyway, these were nice, and this is their color. They turn kind of a bronzy kind of brown color to them. And I've never seen these get really bright red, and typically if we don't get rain, they stay this color for a long time. The leaves stay on almost through the time that they put on new leaves in the wintertime, if we don't get a heavy rain. They will grow to be about 80 feet tall and probably about 60 feet wide. I would say they're a moderately fast growing tree, and they do have one knock in that they're fairly susceptible to oak wilt.
They're the vector for.
They're the vector for oak wilt. Fortunately, we haven't had any problem with oak wilt on our property, but it is in Comal County. And that's one reason why, in terms of selecting trees, you may want to consider doing various species of oak trees and other trees. Biodiversity is just a good thing to do, for yourself and for the environment. So this tree typically, when it becomes on its latter stage of its life cycle, if it makes it through oak wilt, then they tend to hollow out in the middle. They'll get about maybe 14, 20 inches in diameter, and then as they're dying, they start losing the inner inside of the sweetwood there. And you'll see a lot of trees out in the woods that kind of have cavities in them, and typically it's going to be a red oak tree. You know them because also of their loped leaves, right? That are very different than the live oaks that we have. They're very common. Okay, so that's pretty much it on tree selections. And if you want to, again, as we talked about, decide why I want to plant a tree or what type of tree, what my function would be, take a look at these lists here. And I'll leave this up for a second so you can screenshot it or take a photo of it or write it down. But there's 3 sources here, one being Texas A&M Forest Service. They have an on-site thing that you can kind of put in your filters, if you will, of what you want, and it'll kind of spit out what will grow for your area or what's best for your area. Of course, not to be outdone by Texas A&M Aggie, the University of Texas Longhorns, also has a site that they actually are really the umbrella of the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, right? And they have like probably the nation's best database on trees. But understand that in their database, they're only going to have native trees, okay? And of course, native to Texas, native to other areas, but they're not going to have in their database anything outside the US that's not native in their database. But again, you put in what you're looking for, and they'll give you a filter and kind of recommended selections. And by the way, they have a wonderful plant sale every year too, where you can buy hard to find native plants, not only trees. And of course, we also have the Native Plant Society of Texas Native Landscaping Certification Program, which Peggy talked about earlier, where we go through level 1, 2, 3, and 4, where we provide a lot of details on not only trees, but perennials, vines, invasives to avoid, but that's also a good source to go online to find out about trees that will work here.
Does the
Everybody,
Wildflower Center still have their spring and fall plant sale?
they do, but as a result of COVID the last few years, it hasn't been the really big, massive thing where you line up with your wagons, and it looks like somebody shooting off the land sale for Oklahoma or Texas, Now it's
invite only, and you have to
You have to
really
have
go.
a
rather on one day. Now it's over several weekends, and you have to kind of sign up to go there.
With the
And-
lottery,
Yeah,
and it's not nearly as many other vendors that are participating. I think it's actually no vendors.
No vendors.
But I'm hopeful that, as we get a handle on this COVID thing, that they'll return to what they were doing before, because that was a wonderful
all of
place to get
Austin
native
turns
plants.
out, so it was always competitive.
Yeah, you couldn't even find a parking spot. In fact, they've added to the parking lot now because of so many people who show up for that plant sale. And you wanted to show up early, because if you showed up at noon, there wasn't much left.
Paul went recently.
Yeah, I did the ticket.
You did?
Last year.
It's right near the greenhouse.
Yeah.
We've gotten a lot of plants there for our arboretum. And what we do is that they actually, I know the guys that work at the nursery, and they give me plants and I need to tell them how they're doing. And their database is just incredible. I love those guys. They're just wonderful. And they're longhorns too. You got that, April? They're longhorns. Hook them. My
All his
daughter
kids are-
graduated from
That cliff.
Longhorn there.
Yeah, we have, how many people online watching this?
I don't know.
And most of them are related to Leon.
No.
We have 34 people are on Zoom.
That's not
Yeah.
true. But I may be related to you, but I don't know. Okay. All right. So another great guide for finding trees and other perennials and things is the Grow Green Native and Adapted Landscape Plants that is put out by the city of Austin and also
We have
the.
some in the back.
We have some in the back if you'd like. I mean, I have like 5 large shelves of plant books and native books. This is my go-to right here because of just the outstanding photos, and it just has all the key characteristics of the plants that you need right there.
And
So
now you can download the entire
Go
book.
you can download the whole thing and you go to the website there and you
How
can also
often do
see.
they update that?
This one is actually the 5th edition that was updated in 2021. So about every 3 to 4 years. Their original one they had a column that said whether things were deer resistant or not. As we all know, that was like a rough guide, and it's almost like real estate. You know, it really depends upon locally your deer, what they like and what they don't like. And of course, the deer, you know, when you try to show the deer, hey, you're not supposed to, you know, they would eat the list, and you know, so
They don't read.
But anyway, it's a good source. Another good source is the Master Gardener book for Como County. It has a great section on care of trees as well as vegetables and perennials, and this is a great book that is really written just for our, well, not just, but I mean with the Como County in mind is how this thing was written. So if you get a copy of that from them, you can order it from the Texas AgriLife or the Master Gardeners here.
Ace Hardware usually has some copies.
Ace Hardware too, yeah.
I bought them there.
And I think our NACE nursery, South Texas Growers has them as well.
And sometimes the Tractor Supply in your Broncos every now and then, I'll see, or even the food store. A few issues.
Yeah, but you can go online and order it as well from Master Gardeners in Como County. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about tree care. How are we doing on time here?
Well, you have 25 minutes.
Oh, we'll get through that quick. We'll get you home in time, folks, to watch your favorite TV program or your Hallmark love movie or whatever.
There are some late pizza here.
That's right.
They're already home.
34 people are at home already
They're probably watching it now.
and eating their pizza.
Yeah, there you go. Lucky dogs, you. All right, so tree care. Okay, planting a tree and backfilling it. Okay, here's what you need to know. Okay, so you get your tree. Maybe it's in a pot or something, or maybe it's in a burlap bag already. All right, so what you want to do is, this is the hard part, you know, but you got to dig a hole. Okay, and dig a hole in the Edwards Plateau is tough. Okay, but you only dig it as deep as the pot or as deep as the root ball, right? And you want it maybe about 2.5 times as wide, all right? And you want to make sure, not like I did on my mistakes, after you dig the hole, if you got time, you might want to put some water in it and make sure it drains, because if it doesn't drain, you'll have big problems, okay? But anyway, Texas A&M would say the perfect hole is to dig a square hole, because as the plant gets in there, it hits the corners and goes through. Forget that advice. Here, if you can just dig a hole,
Yeah.
just take it the way you can. Here, you know, and of course, you'll need a jackhammer and you know, what do they call it? A rod bar there, you know.
Texas too.
Yeah, the shovels you brought from the Midwest or Houston or California, you can throw those things away. Don't work here. You know, so anyway, you put it in the bottom of the hole there, and you want to make sure that when you backfill it, you try to use native soil if you have it. Now, if it's rocks, you don't want to necessarily put rocks back in there. So you could put a good garden soil in there or amend it type thing. But you try to use as much soil that came out of the hole, not that much, not that lot, and then kind of use the other soil in there. And a tree has what's called a trunk flare. You want to make sure that flare is above the ground. You don't want to cover it up. Okay, so you put your soil back in, and then you make a little berm, maybe about a diameter of about maybe 2.5, 3 feet around it, because when you water it, you want that water to kind of stay within that little berm, right? Okay, then we add mulch. Okay, it's like the sunscreen for the roots. It also helps retain that water that you're watering this plant. Okay, because when you're planting a new tree, it's going to require a couple of years of care, where you're going to have to kind of water it to get it established, right? So you put the mulch in, and I recommend a natural hardwood mulch, because as it breaks down, it adds nutrients to the soil. But you could use rocks, or you could use broken up rubber, or you could use glass. But again, those things are almost like, in some cases, if it's rock or glass, it's absorbing heat, which is not what you want necessarily. So mulch kind of keeps the moisture and keeps the temperature down a little bit. The thing is, you don't want to create these volcanoes that you see in Houston around trees. Where they kind of, here's the trunk, and you got this big old volcano here up against it. Well, the problem with putting the mulch in contact with the trunk is you have a high probability of you're going to establish some fungus going on in disease. So you want to keep it away, probably about 6 inches away from that. But of course, when you're watering with a hose and you're getting rain, it's kind of, as a practical matter, difficult to keep the mulch away from the trunk. But do the best you can. Yes, question.
Do you use mycorrhizal fungi on your tree root before you plant?
I think it's a good idea. Yes, if you have it,
I have so little soil,
right,
with so little mycorrhizal fungi, I just add some.
No, it would be certainly helpful,
Okay.
and other little tricks you might do. I think Sarah or somebody told me they were doing this. Now maybe it's you. On some of the trees we've planted, we've put like a 4-inch PVC kind of pipe down next to it with some holes in it, right? And so as we're watering it,
I did.
you did, okay.
Yeah.
As you're watering it, now it's getting right down, real low down.
That's smart.
That was my engineer husband.
Oh, okay.
Good idea.
I use bubblers on our trees. Now that they're getting mature, I'm probably gonna add some different types, low volume sprayers around, because really where you want the water is at the drip line and inward, not necessarily up against the trunk. But
What
question?
happens to those trees that you put the PVC around when the trunks get as big as the PVC?
No.
It's
It's a
very
pipe
next
this
to it.
big down.
Oh, yeah, not around the trunk.
no, not around the trunk, not protecting the trunk. It's just in the soil. No, that's a fair question.
Yep.
Fair question, because some people put PVC around their trunks to keep the deer away, right? Or split it, or take a drainage pipe and split it and put it around. Anyway. Okay, whoops.
There you go.
Protection from the deer. Okay. Unfortunately, you're gonna have to protect your tree from deer unless you have a physical barrier, an 8-foot fence around your property. And the best protection against our white-tailed deer in our exotics, like what's the spotted deer? Axis deer, is a physical barrier. Okay. And what I use is, well, I'll tell you from my, good judgment comes from bad judgment. And I got all kind of bad judgment stories I could tell you. But initially when we planted our trees, I bought some flimsy wire that was 4 foot tall, and put it around the tree with some really weak T-post and all, and the deer just kind of stood up on their hind legs and just ate, around it and rubbed their antlers on it. So you really need a minimum 5 foot tall welded wire, 14 gauge, fencing to put around that tree using 6-foot T-post driven about a foot into the ground. That's sturdy and that will keep the deer out. Eventually, as the tree matures, you can remove that cage, when the browse line gets above their reach and where when the trunks of trees get a little more rougher and you can handle them rubbing their antlers against it. But I'll tell you right now, not to get off the subject too much, but here in the hill country, we have a problem with deer. There's too many of them. And we have no new saplings growing out in nature now, unless it's protected by something like an agarita that's protecting that sapling, because the deer eat all the new trees coming up. So years down the road, we're gonna start saying, well, God, all our trees are dying and they're all the same age, and we got nothing coming behind it. So we got a deer problem, but that's another topic, I guess. Irrigation, you need to, for 2 years, as I mentioned earlier, you need to take care of this plant and water just about first year, probably once a week to try to get it established. Then you kind of back off to maybe 2 or 3 weeks the second year. Then after that, it should be able to do all right on its own, unless we're in a drought situation, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But they need to be cared for when they're first planted. They're tough, but not initially. They need your help and they need your care. So you got to think about how I'm going to water this with a hose, irrigation system, putting a bucket of water that has little holes in it, because it really needs to be deep rooted, watered, right, Becky? Yes, not just really shallow water like you accused me of, but I know deep rooted all the way down to the roots. Okay, fertilization. Do not fertilize your tree the first year. That will do more harm than good. It needs to kind of adjust on its own to its natural soil and environment on its own. And then you use a year after a year in the springtime, you use a 1959 fertilizer with other type of nutrients in that. Or if you want to go the organic route, that's a slow release, by the way. That way you can just have to do it in the springtime once. Or you could use something like after that, maybe an 8-2-4 type of organic fertilizer. But you'll have to do that more often, also in the fall, because it doesn't last as long as the slow release type of fertilizers. But again, don't fertilize it when you're putting it in the ground initially, the first year. Pruning. Really, if you talk to a forest guy, he says you don't need to prune any tree. Of course, that's in a forest, right? But on your property, for safety reasons, when you have dying canopy trees that the bottom part tend to die, you want to make sure that those things aren't falling on people at the wrong time, right? Also for looks, you might want to prune it. Again, if you're initially working with a native tree that normally is a multi-trunk and you want it to be a single trunk, then you might want to start pruning it early. Okay, so that's really the only reasons where you should be pruning a tree. Not all trees naturally look like lollipops, like we see in Houston and the big cities and all. They don't look that way in nature. But they tend to kind of take care of themselves. They prune themselves over time, at least in the forest. Okay, let's talk a little bit about tree care now that we're in a drought. So there's particular things you might want to consider that maybe go against the grain in normal times. Okay, normally a tree dies from secondary causes. Initially, you'll have the primary cause would be a drought like we're having now, right? So it stresses out a tree. It makes it much more susceptible to disease attacking it or insects attacking it, where a vibrant tree that isn't under stress is not going to necessarily feel the effects of that. So, after you have a drought and stress, then sort of the tipping domino could be insects transporting on oak trees, the oak wilt, or just fungus or disease. So that's typically why trees die, because of a couple of reasons, not just one. Usually a secondary cause. Lack of water. So that leads to less photosynthesis. And Debbie, tell me if I get this wrong though, but trees need water for the chemical reaction to take place in a tree to produce the nutrients, primarily the sugars, right, that trees need, and they need that water. Once they produce these nutrients, they need that water to transport it up to the leaves and all parts of it. So trees are struggling now because they're losing their leaves, so they're not getting as much photosynthesis happening, right? And so they need that water to transport it, but also they need that water for the chemical reaction and actually put them in a position to use those nutrients that are created. And without water, we're not getting that photosynthesis for that to happen. So what we want to do is reduce that stress by supplementing it with water during a drought situation. And you really need to, right now, a young tree that would be planted, let's say this past spring, because I know you wouldn't plant a tree in the summertime during a drought, but you have to basically water that tree probably a couple of times a week. A mature tree, maybe once a week or every 2 weeks during this drought. One key to its stress is looking at the leaves. The leaves kind of tell the story about what's going on with the tree typically. And when they're losing their leaves and they're starting to curl in, then they're saying, hey, I need water, I'm struggling, right? So you want to water from, as we mentioned earlier, from the drip line, where the new roots are typically in a typical tree, inward. Okay, not around the trunk, because if only you water around the trunk, then you tend to cause new trees developing to make their roots gurgle and go around in a circle, and eventually it'll choke itself. So the water is really taken up at the drip line in the new roots at the end right there. So about 2 to 3 gallons per inch trunk diameter. That's at about breast house level is the diameter to measure a tree, a mature tree, not at the bottom, but about this height. So about 2 to 3 gallons. So that's a lot of water for a mature tree. Newly planted trees, they need frequent watering. Again, established trees, maybe 2 to 3 times a week to get them established. Also, right now, you're probably seeing on your trees, you're getting a lot of new sprouts coming out of the trunks. And then you're also getting sucklings coming out the bottom of it and all that stuff. Normally, for visual purposes, I would say just go ahead and clip those off. But now that we're in a drought, that tree needs that extra leaf cover, for getting water, vapor transpiration, and also for photosynthesis. So hold off until we get some good steady rain in the fall before you take those suckers out and the little things off the trunk and off the bottom. It's unsightly, but you're doing your tree a favor by not getting rid of it or pruning it right now. Okay, gosh, where can we see some trees? Wow, if we walked out that door right there, we could be on the Ty Preston Memorial Library trail there. It's right outside also the butterfly garden here. They have some great examples of trees just around this Ty Preston Library, and it's free for anybody to come visit and see it. And during when we do classes at NLCP here, we actually do a tour of the plants and the trees along the trail. So across the parking lot, there's a lot of trees. Behind the butterfly garden, there's a lot of trees that are all staked out and labeled. They don't look so good right now, but they'll make it. Susan actually is out there watering by hand. Susan Vogel, bless her soul. Gosh, she's so great. Also, there's another place you could see here locally is the Arboretum that was established by the Texas Master Gardeners. If you know where the recycling place is, where they have the bark and the Master Gardeners and the Texas AgriLife off of Highway 46, behind the AgriLife building there, the barn there, there's an Arboretum trail that's a self-guided thing that you can do. And they have some wonderful selections of trees to see there. Of course, a really outstanding Arboretum that we have here in New Braunfels is in Landa Park. And they have about 80 different species of trees there, but they're very mature trees, probably average about 40, 50 years old. Yes, question?
No, on the Arboretum in Linda Park, they have the PDF of the guide. And if you stop in the park office, which is where the trail starts, they have the book, the hardcover.
Yes, and it's kind of numbered like 1 through 80 or something, and it's kind of in, you can go backwards or you can go forward or whatever. So it's a really a nice arboretum. You know, like I said, about 80 different subspecies, but they're huge, mature trees. And they have one of the oldest trees really in this area, the Founder's Oak. It's a live oak tree that's well over 300 years old. And it is quite a sight to see that. And they got it fenced off now because everybody used to jump and climb all over it. And now they've got to put the columns and, you know, to hold up the trunks. I mean, the trunks are almost on the ground, but it's the Founder's tree has got a lot of history to it. So maybe I'm thinking next year we could maybe organize a field trip, you know, the Native Plant Society, and just go to Linda Park. But as you pointed out, that little booklet kind of gives you like a self-guided tour, but I could probably tell you little histories about the various trees and little different side stories that might not be in that. So maybe we can consider that. Or we could visit the Dominick Arboretum, where we have over 650 trees that we've planted, along with the, I don't know, 400 trees we already had there, different types. We've got over, about 200 trees we had, native trees. So we've got about 250 species of trees and about 50 adapted trees. And we first started planting these in 2008. So what we could do is I'm going to allocate some time, Becky, on October 8th. That is the morning of the gorge, the gala, but at 9 o'clock, we'll be opened up for a private tour if anybody wants to come to the Dominick Arboretum. We're located on the south shore of Canyon Lake, off of South Cranes Mill Road, somewhere between GVTC and the Startsville. And many of the chapter members have already been there before, but I'm just saying anybody here in the class or anybody online, if you'd like to come see this tour, it lasts about an hour and a half or so. And I kind of tell you a little story about each one of the trees. And as an option, we also could do a tour of our gardens around our home, which are over the top, I guess. Some people say landscaped in that way. So anyway, just send me an email to ldominickpm@gmail.com if you're interested, and we will send you some more information about that. So thank you. Any questions?
Water for your property, are you on a well?
We are on a well. We also do rain capture, but we don't have storage yet. So we just kind of distribute it whenever we get these rare events of rain. Like
You have an irrigation system.
yeah, we have a super duper 24 zone irrigation system. Every tree has potential to be irrigated. We cap it when we don't need to irrigate it. Now everything does get watered with our bubblers on our trees. We can operate it from our phone or from our computer. It knows what kind of weather's going on. It's one of those crazy high-tech things that Becky says, too much technology, you know, just go out with a hose and water.
Yeah.
But it's impossible to water that many trees. Had we not had the irrigation system, we never would have made it through the 2009 and 2011 droughts, you know, and so that's kind of the system we have. We do have a few spots where we have our effluent from our septic system that has sprayers. We have some trees that don't have crazy roots, like the prairie flame leaf or lotus trees, so they get a little bit of water as well from that system that goes on. Yes.
You have a question that came up in the chat a while ago
Okay.
about cedar elms.
Is
and
there,
whether-
is there a disease that
Yeah.
kills cedar elms? I have lost 2 recently.
I'm not familiar with diseases that kill cedar elms here in this area. Obviously, Dutch elm disease for the American elm and other types of elms, which, you know, we've got a few regular American elm trees, but no issues yet, you know. But I'm not familiar with any diseases that kill cedar elms.
I killed one by putting mulch up around it.
Oh, you mean a volcano? Okay. So Dick said that his volcano killed his tree, he thinks.
And there is one comment, City of Horseshoe Bay no longer allows red oaks to be planted.
I understand that because of the issues with the spreading of oak wilt. You know, but there's, gosh, we have 31 different species of oak trees. So we've got a lot of biodiversity. There's a lot of different types of oaks you can try. As a general sense, okay, a general rule of thumb, your white oaks are more resistant than your red oaks. But any oak tree can get oak wilt. Even lacy oaks, you know, but they're much more resistant to oak wilt than the red oaks are. Another question.
Red oak is where the sap, the sweet sap that the little beetles attracted to.
Yes.
And they pick it up from there and then go on, and any wound on a live oak or white oak
Yes.
gets infected.
Yes. What you were saying is that when a tree is damaged or just for whatever reason produces its sap, you know, the insects are attracted to it, you know, and then they carry that disease that they may have to other trees. So when you do prune an oak tree, okay, you want to prune an oak tree either in August or July, where there are less insects around. Not that there's no insects around, but even better, in the middle of the winter, December or January is the best time to prune an oak tree. And immediately you want to plant it, you paint it with dressing or a latex paint, and that's to keep the insects away. But again, as we talked before, don't prune any trees now that we're in a drought. That would be the wrong thing to do. And I can't tell you how many landscaper or contractors out there will prune trees year round and never paint it. I see it happening all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, no question.
Vitex.
Vitex.
I had anything, now I'm from West Texas, so I lived in Midland for 28 years and there was Vitex growing up. So I have 2 in my yard. They look okay, but are they endangered from this drought?
Well, Vitex, which is not native, it's an Asian tree, but they're beautiful trees that produce a nice purple flower and all.
Right.
They're under stress right now because of the drought going on. And I wouldn't be surprised if you have mature trees that the bark at the base is starting to flake off now. That's in response to the drought. You just need to water it, you know, just water it a lot, you know, and again, that surface watering doesn't work so well. You need to get it down into the roots. So, yes.
Well, speaking of lacy oak.
Okay, thank you very much,
Thank you.
everybody.
Not running you off, but you can
Let's
be out by 8. That's when they close the gate.
Yes.
Oh, well, Leon,
Oh,
you were talking about lacy oaks, and let's draw
okay, let's see.
Is that your
Yeah,
number?
since you